Welcome to our second lecture in our series Philosophizing in African Languages. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you in person and online, and our speaker, Professor Rolf Elberfeld, who will talk on philosophy and the plurality of languages. He will, in this lecture, argue for considering the diversity of languages as fundamental to the practice of philosophy. Rolf Elberfeld has been professor of philosophy at the University of Hildesheim since 2008, and he's one of the principal investigators of the Center for Advanced Studies, Philosophizing in a Globalized World, short GLOPHI, hosting this series. In his research, Rolf Elberfeld focuses on philosophy of culture, phenomenology, intercultural aesthetics, philosophy of the body, and Chinese and Japanese philosophy. Questions on languages and translations have been crucial in his work, and we can recommend his book Sprache und Sprachen, eine philosophische Grundorientierung, Language and Languages, a Philosophical Orientation, first published in 2012, as a solid introduction, I would say. But without further ado, Rolf, the floor is yours.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Monica, for the introduction. I hope that the technique will be fixed soon. Otherwise, I just talk without any text at the board. So my topic will be philosophy and the plurality of languages, the connection of these two topics. My lecture will be divided into three parts. The first part is dedicated to the topic linguistic dimensions, the second to the philosophical dimensions, and the third part to the political dimensions of the combination of philosophy and the plurality of languages. So since this lecture will be only at, I think, 40 minutes, I just go really straight to some fundamental points which are important for my argumentation. So I cannot go into details, especially into grammatical details of specific languages. I only try to argue for the combination of philosophy and the plurality of languages. Maybe we can discuss and collect together some grammatical examples for this really crucial connection of philosophizing and grammatical structures in specific languages, as we already discussed yesterday with Professor Ramosi, relating to the Bantu languages or the Bantu language family, which I don't know, and maybe we can find out more connections between some African languages and also the East Asian languages, which with which I am familiar the most, especially Chinese and Japanese. Okay, so just some very fundamental things. So there is already a grammatical distinction in German or in English, which is the distinction between the singular and the plural. We can talk about language and languages. And this is not common in every language, because if we go to Japanese and Chinese, we cannot make the distinction between language and languages. And this distinction between the singular and the plural is really fundamental for our thinking, I think, in European languages, because if we have to explain the difference between the singular language and the plurality of languages, then it's not anymore taken for granted. So this distinction already is a structure which is provided by European, mostly, but not only, but also by European languages. So The next step is there is a possibility of so-called singulare tantum, words which we cannot put into the plural. And normally the philosophy of language refers to a notion of language which cannot be transformed into the plural. Language as a singulare tantum, as the dimension of language itself. And then we talk about, and there's one more grammatical structure, which is not common to all languages, the language, die Sprache, the finite article, the definite article. This is not common to all languages, but we try in German, also in English, if we put these two words together, the language or die Sprache, then we mean language as a singulare tantum. And then it is totally different to the languages. It's quite a different meaning. And so, and if we go, and it's quite tricky, because if we speak about languages in the plural, we also have a singular, but which is quite different compared to the singulare tantum. We have languages and a language, not the language. And so already in relation to the word language, we have specific grammatical structures which are taken for granted normally in the philosophy of language, and which we cannot take for granted if we go, for example, to Chinese and to Japanese. So the starting point of the lecture I'm giving now is a plurality of languages and not language in general. This is really a crucial difference, quite a different starting point. So first I start with the linguistic dimensions. Especially I'm referring to so-called natural languages. And this is also not so easy to define. Normally we talk about natural languages as German, English, French, Japanese, Yoruba, Akan, Turkish, Arabic, and so on. This is a natural language. But if we go into more details, we have to distinguish between individual languages and dialects. For example, in German, we have the so-called Lower German, Bavarian German, Swabian German, East German, and so on, Berlin German, and so we have many Germans. So normally German is to be, the High German is considered as in Hanover, in this region. That seems to be something like German. But so what is German? It's, if you go into details, then at least every single person is speaking a version of German. Like Humboldt's argument is a language is always individual. But, and this we can share, now we share the language English, we can share some thoughts within a community who speaks, for example, English, my broken German English. So, geht das?
Tatsächlich hat es jetzt noch nichts davon funktioniert. Ich habe den Ersatzbeamer schon dabei. Da wäre jetzt die Idee, wir müssten, glaube ich, dann hier vorne einen der Tische hinbringen.
Okay.
Dann würde ich da den kleinen Ersatzbeamer, dann haben Sie eine kleinere Projektionsfläche, aber das wäre jetzt das Einzige, was mir...
Okay, dann versuchen Sie es nochmal. I just go on because the details in the beginning are just some linguistic facts. And if we speak about natural languages, the question will come up, how many natural languages are there in the world? Of course, and I think everybody already thought about that. And if we start to count languages, then we have the problem, what kind of language counts as a language? And then it's depending, so sometimes we have about 7,000 languages in the world. It's in normal categories, if they count, around 7,000 languages. And on my chart, which should be there but is not there, the region with really many languages is Africa. Of course, more than 2,000 languages. The other region is Asia, more than 2,000 languages. Then we have Australia and the Pacific with over 1,000 languages. Then we have the Americas with nearly 1,000 languages. And we have Europe with around 234 languages. So we are the poorest region of the world concerning languages. The richest, one of the richest regions is Africa, of course, and the Asia. And so only 234 languages in Europe which are spoken, but with 1.5 billion people in Europe and 3.6 billion in Asia and around 800 million in Africa and so on. So it's really amazing that there are regions in the world where we find really a lot of languages and which we normally don't take into account in our thinking. One of the basic insights of linguistics today and philosophy of language is, and this is really crucial, and I really want to stress this point, because it was not common nearly until the middle of the 20th century, there are no primitive languages. There are no primitive languages. All natural languages are complex in various ways. And there are even much more complex languages in different regions of the world compared to German or English and so on. So every natural language is in itself a really complex structure which can be used to express a world view. Then in this framework, I just want to mention the biggest languages, not how many languages, but also the biggest languages. In some charts you find, for example, one of the biggest languages, or maybe the biggest language, is Chinese. The second in this list I found is Spanish. Spanish is really a big, and then English, and then Bengali, and then Hindi. So we have, it's somehow astonishing that Bengali, Hindi are among the top 10. Then Portuguese, Russian, then Japanese, and then German. And a specific dialect of the Chinese, the Javanese, then Korean, it's 12, French, Vietnamese, Telugu, Chinese of the U version, Marathi, Tamil, Turkish, and Urdu. So Indian languages are quite big, and a broad variety of Indian languages are in the chart of the top 20 languages. But African languages in this, the top 100 languages from in respect to the number of the speaker. Now, wait a little bit. Wow, yeah, okay. Something is going on.
Sorry.
Okay.
I tried to put out the beamer, but it should not have.
Yeah, okay. I wait a little bit and then go with the flow. Oh, now we. Oh, this is really nice. Languages in Africa, here is the list. Leinwand? Ja. Jetzt kommt sie.
Ja. Das Problem ist, es wird der Beamer mit angehen. Das heißt, diese blaue Neutralprojektion wird jetzt die ganze Zeit...
Ja, aber so ist ja alles
Die
gut.
wird gleich noch mit angehen, das werden Sie sehen.
Okay,
Da wird es ein
alles klar.
bisschen so ein blaues Overlay geben.
Kein Problem.
Solange das...
Ja, okay.
So, das war das.
Ja,
Das
ja
wäre
kein
jetzt,
Problem.
glaub ich, das einzige...
Ja, no, es ist doch ganz hübsch. Alles klar, wunderbar. Dankeschön.
Wenn noch was ist, rufen Sie wieder an.
Ja, okay, super, danke. But I think this helps. It's good. Now we can see something here. And I found it interesting to have a look at those languages which are listed here. Hausa, Yoruba, Arabic in Morocco, and different versions of Arabic. Then Amharic, Igbo, Somali, Rwanda, and Zulu. This under the top 100 languages. And I think it's really interesting to see how many people and what kind of languages are in there. And normally, I think especially in European education, we don't get to know about these languages nearly nothing. And I think it's really important to have a look at that. Also, the languages of India, which are also normally not well known in Europe. Okay, now I go to my second point, to the philosophical dimensions. I brought two little citations which are combined with two theses. The first thesis is language and thought are independent of each other. This thesis dominated European philosophy until the 18th century. And this is really important because I'm arguing against this really long tradition which goes back to Aristotle, and I will talk about this on the next slide. The second thesis is a language is to be thought as a transformation of impressions into a worldview. Language and thinking influence each other. This is just the fundamental thesis, which is in itself quite complex, and we have different versions of this thesis. And I'm mainly referring to Wilhelm von Humboldt, who put the second thesis, for me in a very convincing way. So I go back to this quote from Aristotle, the theory of proposition. Perites tes hermeneias is a very fundamental text of Aristotle in the beginning of his Organon. And this was really taken for granted for hundreds of years in Europe, and still today it is the normal conviction of philosophers when they are starting to do philosophy of language. So Aristotle says, the sounds, then, for which the voice is formed are signs, symbola, of the ideas evoked in the mind, and writing is a sign of sounds. And just as not everyone has the same writing, so the sounds are not the same for everyone. But what is primarily indicated by both, the simple mental ideas are the same for all people, and so are the things whose image the ideas are. So the ideas are the same for everybody, and the expression is different. But if we have like a word table, or tsukue, or something in other words, chair or Stuhl, tsukue, or something in different languages, the idea, according to Aristotle, is everywhere the same. only the expression differs. And this is really the fundamental conviction of the normal philosophies of language. The ideas are the same for all people, only the expressions for them are different. Second thesis, which is still not common, and it came up in the 16th century for the first time in an Italian text written by Speroni. And he tried to introduce Italian, Toscanian, he said at that time, in contrast to Latin and ancient Greek. He said Italian can say something different in a different way compared to Latin and ancient Greek. And then this thesis that the languages make possible different ways of thinking emerged in that context in Europe. And Wilhelm von Humboldt is one of the main thinkers for this. So I quote, "Language is a worldview not only because it must equal the scope of the world, but also because only the transformation it brings about with objects enables the mind to understand the connection that is inseparable from the concept of the world. Humans also live primarily with objects as language presents them. And since their feelings and actions depend on their ideas, they live exclusively in this way. So what language presents to us to be considered as the world, as the objects, this is what we think the world is. So there is a deep connection between the expression of the language and the world of the objects. And so the language is a medium by which we think about the world, by which we perceive the world, because if we don't have a word for something, then we nearly don't realize that there is something like that. And sometimes maybe we have a very specific feeling for which we cannot find a word. I think we all know this. And then we go to another language, and there are a lot of words and a lot of expressions for that kind of feeling, and so on. So a language does not lock us up, but it does suggest to us how I, others, and things appear to us. And this formulation is for me very crucial. It does not lock us up. We are not locked in a language. A language suggests something. And this is somehow a very crucial differentiation in respect to the so-called Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. There is a tendency that every language is a world static in itself, and we cannot escape that. We cannot think time in Hopi or something, which is not true. We can think different things, but the language always offers us a structure which seems to be very self-evident. But if we start to think in this language, also other ideas can come up. So we are not locked into a language. This is, for me, very important difference. Now a quote from Nietzsche, where he thinks, and Nietzsche is one of those philosophers who thought a lot of this connection between language and experiences. I quote, "Language and the prejudices on which language is built often hinder us in our exploration of inner processes and drives. For example, because words actually only exist for superlative degrees of these processes and drives. But now we are accustomed to no longer observing precisely where words fail us, because it is embarrassing to think precisely there. Indeed, formerly, we involuntarily concluded that where the realm of words ended, the realm of existence are ended. Anger, hatred, love, pity, desire, recognition, joy, pain. These are all names for extreme states. The milder, middle, and even the constantly playing lower degrees escape us, and yet they are precisely what weave the web of our character and fate. And this is also an interesting dimension, because we seems to, if we start with a language, then and think language presents objectivity or the world to us, then we think, okay, we have a word, this is something. But if we go deeper into the observation of the world itself, feel into it, perceive it more closely, for example, the feeling of a desire or of joy, then we can discover many different levels in this feeling, different levels and degrees in these feelings. And sometimes, and I think this is the task of the poets, they find new words for new levels, for new experiences. And so language will be enriched by being touched by specific things in the world. And this is mainly the aesthetical dimension by which we are touched, and then new words coming up. And if we go to other languages, for example, when I learned Chinese and Japanese, but also I know in Korean, we have words for very specific feelings and ways of interconnection, which we cannot express in German, where we don't have any word for it in German. We have big word fields for specific experiences which are lacking, for example, in German. And this is, Nietzsche is pointing to this differentiation of the sensuous reality, aesthetical experiences, very fine and subtle differences, and the language which supplies us with specific expressions. And I think this is an interconnection which is an ongoing dynamic within languages and also within sciences. So the philosophical consequence is every language is as such a philosophical contribution. This is my really deep conviction. Every language is as such a philosophical contribution. So we can make an analysis of a language as a philosophical contribution. Not only texts are philosophical contributions, but also languages in itself are philosophical contributions. So from a philosophical perspective, it is possible to see each different language as having its own, and I call it proto-philosophy. This is because every language offers a complex framework of expression and structure into which, thanks to language acquisition in our early years, we grow at an early age. As we all learn our native languages from other people, the language in question is taken for granted as a natural medium of communication within a given language community. However, we are not simply locked into our given languages. It is true that each individual language gives us the possibility to reflect on language as such as a medium of understanding. The self-reflexivity of language that inhabits each particular language is precisely what enables the first opening for thinking about the possibilities of structuring the world in a given language. This is for me really important, that within language we can think about language. And this is already an opening. We can think about the medium. This self-reflexivity provides the possibility to think about the structuring of our world. But we can go on. Being at home in 2 or more languages then opens up the occasion to engage in a self-reflexive comparison between different languages, whereby the structuring possibilities and diversity of individual languages become even clearer. In this sense, individual languages function as proto-theories of reality. Proto, because in our early years we are not introduced to them theoretically, but instead linguistically and practically. From this perspective, each individual language is as such already a proto-philosophical contribution to the development of reality, and is thus of philosophical relevance. Setting out from this thought, we can envision a multilingual practice of philosophy to which all languages can make an important contribution. This is really, for me, also the starting point of our project somehow, that all these languages are important, and this is also somehow an act of decolonizing thinking, that we are not fixed to a specific language or only to 3 or 4 European languages, but that we take all the languages as really seriously as philosophical contributions. And obviously, we cannot do that alone. We can only do that in cooperation. And by taking this thought as fundamental, philosophizing itself cannot be successful only by doing it by one person. We have to collaborate in philosophizing, because we normally are really limited in our knowledge of the languages. And in that case, in that respect, also every person in the world can contribute seriously to this dialogue about the languages and the possibilities of thinking. And so there with the fact of the plurality of languages in that philosophical respect, a new way also of critique can be opened up. The prejudice structure of one language can be illuminated and potentially criticized through the prejudice structure of another language. This results in a necessity for multilingualism, for philosophizing with critical intent. So there is a very specific way of criticizing each other from different forms of languages. For example, last week, Professor Ramosi talked about this structure of movement and moving, the moving ways of reality. And I think the European languages tend to stabilize structures, to fix structures. And in other languages, for example, also in Chinese or in Asian languages, we have a tendency to verbalize, to make the reality into a dynamic structure. And so these kind of critiques we can have if we take into account all these different language structures. So the diversity of languages as a critical potential in everyday life and in science. Thesis: the boundaries of my world become visible through transitions into other languages. Multilingualism is therefore necessary in all humanities in order to contrast, explore, and discuss the complexity of possible experiences. Philosophy necessarily relies on multilingualism. Relocating philosophy to English alone is thus highly problematic for philosophical reasons. Even if we use English as a lingua franca to communicate internationally, I think it's still very important to learn different languages, and maybe we can support an environment within philosophy which is more multilingual, as we already recently experienced on our workshop, where I think we had English, French, Portuguese, these at least 3 languages. Yeah. Okay. Now I come to my last point, a short one, political dimensions, and there are a lot of political dimensions in respect to the plurality of languages, and I want to stress especially one. The unity of nation and language in the 18th century. There is it seems to be natural in the discussion in the 18th century, 19th century, especially in the European context, that one language is necessarily bound to one nation, and one nation is bound to one language. And I think it is really crucial to interrupt, to break this problematic connection, that a language is not bound to a nation, that we really separate these things from each other. The old 18th century image is the Germans speak German as their national language. The English speak English. The French speak French. The Italians speak Italian. Japanese speak Japanese. But the Swiss speak German, Italian, and French. No? So it's already it's very easy to break these things. And the Chinese speak Chinese. We cannot say that, because Chinese, we have Mandarin, we have Cantonese, we have different dialects in Chinese, but we have one script, but not the pronunciation is different. So we cannot say the Chinese speak Chinese. It's nonsense. So we can see already, if we go to specific context, it is not possible to say that. And the Indians speak Indian. Of course not, because there is no Indian as a language. Indian does not exist. Indians speak maybe Hindi, Marathi, or Bengali, or other languages, which are not connected to a national entity. But today, there's a tendency in India to reconnect language and nationality, that Indians should speak Hindi. No? This Hindutva and the whole idea. And we can see how problematic this connection is. And on the political level, we have a lot of things going on in different countries to bring these 2 dimensions together, that a group of people who are in India speaking Hindi are the main considered as the main group within India, and so on. But of course, the reality of India is totally different, and you have at least 60 or 70 languages. I don't know the exact number right now.
350. Including dialects, 350.
Including dialects, 350. Okay, so many languages in. As also in different countries, also in Africa, you have a lot of languages, and you cannot say that Nigerian people speak Nigerian. They speak many different languages, and so it's really crucial, and it's an idea which is it was born somehow in Europe, and was spreaded into the world, that there is a connection between a language and a nation. But it's not like that. So instead of national languages, we can use speaker communities or language communities. And this is very important to change this expression, because language communities, for example, if Austrians and Germans talk together, we talk in German, but it's not the same nationality. But we can, it's a language community. And with some Swiss people, we have a language, or with some US Americans who learned German. There's a big language community which speaks German, which speaks French, and so on. I think it's important to make this clear distinction from national language and language communities. That is a group of people who are active in a language, either orally or in writing, regardless of their national or also cultural origin. There is also a problematic connection between language and culture. We cannot say there is one culture and one language. It's not like that. Even then, it becomes a little bit more problematic in respect to the so-called proto-philosophy and the culture, because some cultural tendencies do come out of language structures, but they are not fixed to specific cultural entities. So I think we have to separate these things and think about languages as spoken by language communities. For philosophical and political analyses, languages must be completely separated and distinguished from the concept of nation. Likewise, one cannot establish a firm connection between language and cultures. The focus must be on languages and their communities of speakers without being tied to a specific political or ethnic group. Many languages are cultural multitudes that develop beyond national and cultural borders. And I think this is also an interesting thing that we can observe, for example, in English. The English language is used nowadays by so many different peoples from so many different cultural backgrounds. And the English language is somehow enriched by this and becomes a cultural multitude. It's absolutely not fixed to a specific culture. Of course, you can have specific tendencies in English language, and it's also connected with political powers and so on. But, for example, the observation we had that since 20-25 years, we have so many global histories of philosophy written in English. And this is cultural enrichment of the English language, because these books were often written by people from different countries, from Africa, from Latin America, from India, from other nations or other places. And so it's a process of enriching a specific language. Every language is like a womb for every new cultural developments, new cultural developments and new possibilities for criticism. And so every language and the enrichment of language and languages is really an interesting womb, I would say, to enrich the ways of thinking. So I already come to my conclusion, and then we can have some discussions and maybe also collect from our different experiences, from our backgrounds of our languages, and talk about what I tried to offer. The diversity of languages is of central importance for philosophical thought and the critical development of the humanities. Okay, and should therefore receive special attention in philosophy and other humanities. This also means that the goal of science policy should be to recognize and promote a significantly large number of languages as languages of science. I think this is also a very crucial political thing, that I myself, I'm somehow a product of the language policy of Japanese, because the Japanese government decided in the 80s to support students from abroad to learn Japanese. So I got a scholarship to learn Japanese in Japan, even studied before in Germany, And then I was supported by the Japanese government to learn Japanese, and so I'm a product of the Japanese policy, of the language policy. And I think we have a lot of, like the German, the Goethe Institute is also an institution to support German in the world. And we have all these power games also concerning the languages. But I really think that we should enrich the languages also within the humanities and within philosophy, not only for diversifying the knowledge for its own sake, but for enriching the possibilities to think and to philosophize. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this talk and for navigating the technical difficulties so smoothly. I also brought the book that I mentioned before. I will pass it around. Yeah, thank you very much. I found the statement, every language is as such a philosophical contribution, a very strong statement, and I'm sure you have comments and questions. I invite you, of course, natürlich können Sie auch auf Deutsch Fragen stellen, because we are talking not only in theory about the plurality of languages. And there's also the invitation to collect together grammatical samples of what is specific to certain languages. But I already saw Namita, please.
Okay. Thank you for the talk. You say we are not locked in language, as the same ideas can appear in many languages. But I think we are locked in expression, because some words, some meanings of words in some languages just cannot be translated in other languages. They change meaning. Even if it's a subtle or a slight change, the meaning changes. So I think the expression is where we are locked, and I wanted to ask what you think about that. And the second question is, do you know what were the oldest languages, or what are the oldest languages on the planet? Thank you.
I'll start with the last one. I think the oldest languages we don't know because they were spoken languages. And we don't know where it starts. And if I talk to our dog, I think my dog is talking. And so he makes like, ooh. And then he talks to me. And ooh, oh, ooh. Really, it's so interesting. So many different tones with my dog. And so I think this is a totally different topic, but the oldest language is the relation of beings. Maybe. Because also plants go to the sun and they communicate maybe with the sun. And so then the word language, it's broader than normal. But I think we have expressions with voice and so on. And when I think we developed the ability to listen, something like language came up in the evolution. But of course, the oldest written languages, maybe ancient Egyptian, ancient Chinese, Sanskrit, I don't know, I think the script is a little bit later. So these are one of the oldest languages. So the other point is to be locked up in language. We are not locked up into language, I said. And my main point in this, to make the formulation like this, is because normally the philosophers who advocate the other thesis, that thinking and language are different, they will say, if we are so much influenced by language, then we cannot really think freely. And I also said we have the possibility of reflexivity within thinking. We can think in relation to that, to the use of language. We can think about that. And this itself is not only language, it's somehow interestingly different. Thinking and language are still different, but I'm not locked into a specific, so that's the reason why I'm not really locked into a specific language. And you said the expression, of course, we are not locked, but we are bound to the expressions, but not locked. And that should be another different thing, I think. We are bound to those words which we do have in our language. But, as we know, philosophers start to create new words, like Heidegger, for example. Yesterday I had a talk about Heidegger, and Heidegger is creating new words all the time. Also Nishida I worked about creating new words all the time. But also in philosophical text and in poetry, you have these phenomenon that they are creating new words for new feelings, for new thoughts, for new something. And I think this dynamic is important, that the language itself is also the possibility to create new words. And if a word comes into use is another question. For example, when I came back from Japan in 91 to Europe, I suddenly realized that the word intercultural came into the language. It became a little bit more usual. I've never heard it before. When I went to Japan in 89, I never heard intercultural before. But when I came back, after 2 years, intercultural was somehow, I heard it in broadcast, and so it came into use. And these kind of things are like the dynamics of language. And we realize, or we can realize, how the language itself or the languages change. And so this is my point, that we are not locked, but of course we are bound, but not really fixed to these expressions. We can create new expressions. But whether people accept our new expressions or not, it's also another question. For example, Professor Ramosi said be-ing, being, and so on. It's a new way to handle words, to express yourself, and to make differences within language. And so we can make differences all the time and create new differences. And the main thing is, for me, as I said with Nietzsche, we can feel. And to feel and to trust our bodily feelings is a different thing than to express them. And to especially in the traditions of meditation, new words came up by trusting your own awareness, your bodily awareness, and then they thought, oh, there is something which I can name in this way. Taking attention to all the different processes within my body and so on. And if you go back to that, then a new dynamic starts. If we can be, or if we are aware of very subtle things, then we can find new ways, new names for it. So there are different directions how languages are dynamic.
Yeah, thank you. There's another question.
Okay. I wanted to refer to a question, because I think we are not locked in expressions, because I think language consists of so much more than only a fixed vocabulary, but in turn is like a dynamic structure, like you said. And so you can play with words, you can use metaphors, you don't have to have an exact, because I study translation,
Yeah.
and it's so interesting to see how you can play with words to get across a meaning. And I think you have so many resources, like you can tell stories, you can give context, you can describe. You have to see a language more like a vivid thing than just, how do I say it?
Yeah.
It's not just what you read in the books, but how you feel it. I think that's very important. And also what you said with dogs is also very interesting, because they use mostly corporal language, and I think these are two things that you can never separate. When people don't have corporal language, they are normally mentally ill. And so it's always these two things. And also if you go further beyond that, and say that in meditation maybe there come up different or more aspects of language and maybe more words, then I think that would be somehow point to a universal guiding intelligence. And that's also something very interesting, as I find, because I think dogs would only communicate by corporal language, but also telepathically, I think. And so I think it's a very interesting concept to think about that for humans, if that could be possible when we tune to our more subtle senses, because I think it's like gradual and we can evolve very past the point where we're at right now.
Yeah, thank you. So I just referred to one point. I supervised a master thesis here, and the topic of the master thesis was, when does language start? Where? With what kind of expression does language start? And she made an observation about something like that. Or, is this language already? Of course. It's an expression when I say, no? It's something you got from me, no? And no? It's different. It's already language. No? You have comment on that?
I wanted to comment on that because I also worked in a dog school, and I always told the people when the dog starts to communicate, and it was always that the dog looked for guidance.
Yeah.
So something happened, and they looked at their owner like, what I'm supposed to do now, and the owners always miss it. They always miss it. So I tell them, you have to, concentrate a little more on how many aspects of communication your dog is showing you. And that's also, I think you can see the same in humans when you look closely, but most people are not, very accustomed to closely.
And referring to that is, for example, there are languages like the Japanese, they do have a lot of onomatopoetic expressions. Peda peda, hara hara, I don't know, so many different words which are only like indicating a sound which is similar to the feeling. It's not an expression, and so on. And I think we have a lot of languages. And recently on the workshop, somebody spoke from South Africa, the Click language. This kind of language it's really fascinating that a totally different way of producing a sound is a language, and so on. Okay.
Yes, here's another question.
Oh, okay, so. Thank you, Rolf. Very interesting. I have two questions on the one on the philosophical implication and one on the political implication of your thesis. On the philosophical one, I'm thinking about the possible critique. Let's say that, for example, following Aristotle and the case you mentioned and the history of philosophy, we have also a sedimentation of history of philosophy, but also the way of philosophizing. We can refer back to these different stances on philosophical viewpoints and rely upon these philosophical contributions. When we take this thesis seriously, in the sense that each language is as such a philosophical contribution, we need a new philosophical method according to this new understanding of philosophy. And so one possible critique would be that in each language, we will have a form of philosophy and philosophizing, which can become a tradition, or a sedimentation. What about the communication between them? And how do they understand each other? And can they call each other into question? And what does it look like, this meta level of philosophical communication? That's one possible critique I was thinking about and struggling to how could you answer this possible critique? And the second one, and concerning the political implication of your thesis, as you mentioned very well in Italian case, and I think in German case in 19th, 18th, 19th century, the the language policy was an identity, a form of identity constitution, for example, the Grimm brothers, and in Italy as well also. If we think about the plurality of languages and we want to dissociate the unity of a language from this national identity and recognize this multilingualism in a certain territory, let's say, we will have a new form of, I would say, political, I won't call it nationality or nation, but the form of community, how these people develop a sense of belonging, for example, together. My question would be, where do you see this element of community if we don't take, if we dissociate this, dissociate it from the linguistic element, to say that the unity of a nation, for example, is the unity of a language, as it was the case, for example, in Italy. So what are other elements of community building initiatives, for example? Yeah. Thank you.
Just very brief to the last one. I think for Germany, we have a constitution, and that creates our identity as a citizen of Germany. And it's totally open whether we speak German or Amharic or Arabic. If we consider ourselves on the basis of the constitution as a German, then we are Germans. And so I think there's, on the political level, I think there is already this kind of solution. And there's no necessity to combine it with the language. Of course, that it is good that we can communicate. Then we can choose a specific language. For example, what kind of language should we speak at school or something like that. And so we have to negotiate that on the basis of the constitution. I think this, for me, would be a very simple, because it's, of course, you raise a complex question of identity building on the political level, but this would be my first answer to this. The constitution could be one possibility to create these kind of identities. The first question was concerning about the possibility of understanding between these different languages. Of course, if we go from German to English, it's not so problematic. But if we really go deeper into English, then we realize, oh wow, this is really a different language. Mm-hmm. And I was fascinated by Chinese and Japanese, and I went to that languages. And then I found it was really hard to understand what is going on in these languages. Mm. And I found it was really necessary to live there, to live with the people, and how they use the language to create their way of life. How the language we are living by, the metaphors we are living by. We are living by these languages. But it's not necessary that we are only using one language. There are many people in many cultural contexts worldwide where people use at least 4 languages. And then we can switch in ourselves. And in connection to this, I think, and I took up some theories and phenomenologies of personalities, that we are already multiple personalities. Always we are multiple. We are not only one. And to consider oneself as one is already a very interesting philosophical question. But if I think, especially those people who are speaking different languages as a mother tongue, and just Sol went away and he was talking about this, and you are also somebody who is at least like living in 3 languages, and the negotiation between the different worlds, because even the body will react differently if you speak French and German or Persian. And if I start to speak Japanese, my body will be different immediately. And there is a connection, and this is not so easy, because that goes down to the roots of our existence. And if we start to negotiate this, then we get really fundamental questions on the philosophical level. And there we can see that there are different fundamental options how we can understand ourselves. More from the relational aspect or from the individual aspect and so on. All the languages will create something, an evidence in ourselves, which says, oh, you are really an individual. And other languages will say, no, you are not an individual, you are always dependent. And this is reflected on the level also of the words. For example, ningen, a person in Japanese, is a human being and in between. We are always in-betweens. I am an in-between between us. And then we go to another interesting grammatical form, which I did not mention. In ancient Greek, we have not only singular and plural, we also have the dual. The dual. We have a grammatical form where we can say we are speaking together. We too are speaking.
Arabic as well.
In Arabic as well. I think in other languages. We have also a trial in other language. 3 people are talking together. And these kind of grammatical forms are really interesting because they are indicating what is considered as important. Another, for example, in ancient Japanese, we have the distinction between a form of the past which I experience by myself. I'm talking about something which I experience myself, or a form of the past which I heard that somebody experienced, as a grammatical distinction. And so I can talk about a past which, in a grammatical form, which indicates I experienced this in the past. And so on. These kind of really interesting grammatical distinctions indicates what was important for these people to differentiate. For example, one of the most influential grammatical forms in European languages was the invention of the so-called definite article. The definite article, the to or he in Greek. And this came out of the demonstrative pronoun. What is it in English? Demonstrative pronoun.
I think pronouns is an
pronoun, but it's demonstrative pronoun. So from the demonstrative pronoun, the definite article developed in ancient Greek, and then they were able to indicate the truth, and not a truth or truth. The truth. We are speaking about the truth. And this is also in German, of course, die Wahrheit, and so on. And in Japanese, you cannot say that. You cannot say the truth. It's only one, the truth. You cannot say it in that way. You have to make a longer sentence out of that. And for the Greek, it was really important to fix an essential thing with the definite article. And there it seems to be totally evident then from that time on that we have these substances which are only one and in this definite way which are not related to anything else. and so on and so on. And I think this is really important, but we have to go make an analysis of these structures because it creates an evidence in our philosophical thinking which seems to be natural. And I think philosophy in itself had a language turn, of course, no? From like already in the 19th century, Nietzsche and Wittgenstein and so on. But especially also Wittgenstein never thought about the plurality of languages. And so we can radicalize the critique of language and languages considering the different structures of language. And like bringing into the philosophical game really different languages from all over the world, from all regions of the world. And I think we cannot do everything, of course, with all the 7,000 languages, but we can at least think about some languages from some language families, which can be not representatives, but can be that they can show some structures which are important to criticize specific philosophical practices.
Yeah, I think, well, you asked also for the examples, right? And I think you already gave some. I was just thinking when you were speaking now about, well, the definite articles. Already in German you have 3, der, die, das. In French or Italian you have 2, which then often leads to a confusion to assigning like a biological gender directly to it. In many African languages you have noun classes. So in Wolof, for instance, you have 8 singular classes and 2 plural, which also appear in the form of articles, definite or indefinite, but it's a different form of classification. And Wolof is not very strict by it, but for instance, there's the G class, so you have an article that can be ga or gi, that assigns it to like the tree class, basically. So it's mostly trees and some water bodies that are classified this way. And I think that these are, for instance, interesting examples. I was also thinking about Wolof. There's the possibility of reduplication that is also found in other African languages as an intensification, right? So we even see it in African forms of English sometimes. So the now is now. Which would be in Wolof legi. But there's the word for science is often constructed this way. So you have ham, to know, and then ham is science, right? So I sometimes say all-encompassing knowledge, right? It's an intensification of knowing is then knowledge and science. So I think these are the...
That's interesting.
It starts as some kind of game, but then it really makes you also reflect back on how you think and how you conceptualize, right? So are there any other examples? Because I know there are many languages in this room, actually. So you've been thinking. And I've been also thinking about bodily languages. When I invited our colleagues from our workshop to my house, when I served Bado with water, I did it like this. Because since he's older than me, not because he's a man, I have to also show this in bodily language, right? And that's and automatically just knowing that we share also this language, I would also would feel strange for me not to apply it. Because I had because I had conversations in which I was criticized for not doing it in a certain context, and I think this. Well, in the Japanese context, you can even talk more about these aspects. But are there more contributions?
I would be really interested in other structural observations in languages. Do you have some observation? Professor Ramusi.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed the presentation very, very much. I see that I'm going to ask a different question, and it's partly connected with a look at your text as well. I see it is all about Sprache, Sprache, speech, speech, speech. And I'm wondering, because often in my meditations, I come to the conclusion that silence is the sharpest form of communication and conversation.
Silence.
Silence. Is that language?
This is, thank you so much. This is a very Japanese question, you know. A very Japanese question. I think 2 years ago, a colleague came to this place and we had a workshop on Zen philosophy, and he gave a long lecture about language and silence. And silence is, now I get the problem of not of expressing what is silence is the womb of language, maybe. Silence can be language. There are so many different ways to be silent. You can just hesitate not to speak. And I gave a lecture with 45 minutes of silence, not saying anything, but on the other campus, close to our office there. And I used the words of Derrida, comment ne pas parler, how not to speak, how not to speak, how not to speak, how not to speak, how not to speak. And so you can talk about this or be silent about how not to speak. And now we are coming into a Buddhist area of thinking because silence is the emptiness of language. It's the empty place of language. But the emptiness itself is the full reality itself. And so language and silence are not like opposed to each other, but enabling each other. Maybe this enabling each other. Like in music, I had a lot of discussions about with composers who are composing the silence. And John Cage, you know, maybe John Cage had this 433 piece with the piano, and there was only silence, silence, silence. But the silence itself is really vivid. And I think, to answer like this, the real vivid silence is maybe the most outspoken reality. Something like that. We can go on.
Okay, so there are 3 hands raised. We'll take all 3 comments and then you have a last reply.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof. I really enjoyed every part of the talk. So, like Monica said, there's so much of non-verbal communication that goes on in my culture as well. For example, when just like what she described, if you are giving someone to somebody and the person is older, there's a way you curtsy to show that you are showing respect. to the person. So there is non-verbal communication. For example, also I remember that growing up, if your mom takes you out, and normally you've been told that don't collect things from strangers, but you just met this random person on the way, or your way to where you're going, and the person says, is it okay, and maybe the person is eating, and the person says, is it okay if I share this with your daughter? And the person asks your mom. Your mom says, it's okay, but she uses her eyes or her facial expression to tell you that if you dare take it. So that is a form of communication that does not involve speaking.
Yeah.
Is that also a form of language? Yeah. That leads me to my question that, Prof, would you say communication is bigger than language, or does communication always involve a language, at least?
Yeah. I think it's again the really complex interconnection between our bodily existence, our sensuous being in the world, and a so-called natural language. I was talking about natural languages, which are normally like thought of as words, grammatical structures, and so on. But language itself, and even expression or express yourself, is much broader. And maybe communication is a better word for that, the bodily communication, but I'm always really aware of the dimension of the connection between the words and my body. And I cannot be convincing without my body. And this is an old rhetorical evidence. If you go to Cicero or to Quintilian or something, they are combining the words with the body. And you have to interplay, the interplay between the bodily dimensions and the meaning and the language itself, it's totally important. And what you described is just that. And in everyday life, we are so used to this fluidity between body and language. And I just recently supervised a PhD thesis on the embodiment of words in theater. A teacher who taught for 30 years students how to embody literal texts, to speak Schiller or Goethe on the theater, and how to connect this with the body. And he talked a lot about the breathing, because speaking is breathing. I am breathing now. It's breathing. It's nothing else than breathing. And so our speaking is already bodily, a bodily breathing. And how we breathe, we produce also a specific way of meaning by breathing. And an exercise of breathing itself can enrich the meaning of our words, and so on and so on. So there's a really broad. Leon wrote a dissertation on this combination of body and mind and how it comes together in specific practices. And I think we are doing it all the way already, but we can have some exercises and cultivation practices where the connection between the body and language can become even closer.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please be brief.
Just a small comment to highlight also what you said about silence. I guess silence is really the fundament of language, because between every word there is silence. Yeah. So if there is no silence in language, you just have noise and you will not understand anything. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. And there was a last comment.
There's over...
Two, okay.
Two. Yeah.
So, two very brief comments.
I also wanted to comment on the thing with silence, because I think in silence there's still a current of information, and I think sometimes it's easier to tune in when you just remain silent, because then ideas and a new way of perceiving things emerges. And other times I think it's easier to speak, and by speaking embark on these currents of information. When, I don't know if you understand me, but you said something about the trees growing in the direction of the sun. That also would be some kind of information that's encoded, and well, trees can't speak, but I think there's something that we can use as as a compass.
Compass, yeah.
Something universal, and I think that's most easily found in silence.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also wanted to say that I enjoyed this lecture a lot, because it kind of showed me that the language and culture is so intertwined with each other, and we kind of can't separate these two from each other. And there are a lot of interesting points which you mentioned. For example, that you talked about that it's so important to collaborate with others, which I can agree on. Because there's I think there's no way how this multiculturalism and this multilingualism exists without being in contact with each other. And I also noticed myself that, for example, if I'm, for example, traveling to a country, or my parents' home country, then I also want to learn even more about the language, and because I'm trying to adapt to the surroundings and the people and the culture, it's also a step for me to learn even more about the language. Or even if I'm trying to learn another language, I kind of feel like I'm not able to thrive as much if I'm not able to kind of travel to the country and maybe learn about the culture and stuff like this, which is kind of sad in my opinion, because if there aren't people who maybe have this the knowledge about the language, maybe because they're arriving from that specific country, then it's kind of difficult to kind of learn even more about the language. But I think language and this multilingualism is so important, and to also get to know different people from different origins, and more about the language. And I also like the point you mentioned about that language can enrich the ways of thinking, which I also can agree on. But I also think that it's also very important to kind of respect the languages that you're maybe want to learn from. For example, there are a lot of times where I kind of saw maybe younger people talking about, hey, can you teach me something about your language? And another person was just jokingly telling them a slur, or a disrespectful word in their language. But I think it's very important to also learn a new language, and also knowing what's the meaning behind every word, and to also just respect the language, and to also appreciate it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So these were our closing remarks for today.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here. Thanks again, Rolf. Maybe another hand of applause.
Thank you for the contribution. So thank you.
Because of the public holiday, next week there is no lecture. The week afterwards, for those joining us in person, we are not meeting here, but on the Samuelson campus, building B. But I wrote it on the website and also on the Learn web. So please join us on Samuelson campus, not at Domain.
Okay.
And from thereafter, it will always be in the Aula.